moderator of this webinar. You will probably know this by now, but please keep your name clearly indicated when you enter in the webinar and so on, because it will be really useful for me when you use the chat, the Q&A for making your questions. It will be really useful for me to know your name, so then I can ask that question on your behalf to the speaker today. If you have any technical question, or you realize that something's not working that well in the screen sharing, something like that, please let us know on the chat, because it's something that we only see the people who are involved in this webinar. So then nobody else will be able to see it from the webinar participants. Also, to make you aware that this webinar is being recorded, probably you got the notification from Zoom, and the recording will be available on the European Marine Board website and also its YouTube channel. The webinar today is linked to two documents of the European Marine Board. One was published this year and is on ocean oxygen. And the second one was published a couple of years ago on citizen science. So the first one, on oxygen, of course, it highlights the role that oxygen plays in the ocean, and also how important it is to have a healthy ocean for us, and also, you know, the threat of deoxygenation is something that probably our speaker today will highlight. And the second one, the citizen science, even though that is a couple of years old, it's still really relevant on, you know, providing a guide on how to make a useful, and especially for your science, citizen science projects. The speaker today is Toste Tanhua, who is a senior scientist at GeoMar, Germany. He's also a chemical oceanographer, and also, as you can see in the picture, really likes sailing. He's co-chair of the steering committee of the Global Ocean Observing System, GOOS, and he's also the coordinator of the EU-funded project EuroSea, a project that European Marine Board was also involved. So with that, I will give the floor to Toste, and wish you all the best. Toste, all yours.
Thank you, Angel, and welcome everybody. So I'm going to see if I can share my screen, and I guess. If I can. For the technical things here, but I'm going to be done with this in a second. Okay, so now you should see my screen, and welcome to this webinar, and thank you very much, Angel, and your colleagues at the European Marine Board for inviting me to talk about the project Sailing for Oxygen, and which is a citizen science project for yachters, you know, the yacht crews. So to start with from the beginning here, I'm going to see if I can advance here. A little bit about myself. As Angel told you, I'm a chemical oceanographer. I'm originally from Sweden, but I live in Germany now. And I've been sailing all my life. As you can see me on the picture here, sailing on a Volvo Ocean Race 65 in Cape Town, which was a lot of fun for me. And of course, down to the left is my little boat that I've been sailing for a few years. But most of my work is done on research vessels like the Meteor here to the right. And as a chemical oceanographer, I always been thinking about ocean science and ocean observations as something that you do as a scientist on research vessels, or maybe from another platform. And I haven't really been, you know, much friend of citizen science in ocean science. That had changed radically over the last years, I must say, and I'm a big fan of citizen science. And, you know, we can talk about what citizen science really mean. But I'm really changed, and one of the things that came out of that is here. I can tell you that we've been working with sailors for some years now to do ocean observations. This particular boat, Malizia Yacht Club de Monaco, is well, that boat is now sailing somewhere. But Boris Herman, the skipper of that boat, is right now sailing close to the Azores on a race, making ocean observations. And this is his previous boat when he did a Vendée Globe, which is a single-handed, non-stop, non-assistant race around the world. So Boris sailed around the world in 80 days on that boat while making ocean observations. And I just take this as an example what that can actually bring. First of all, we do have technology now to make observations on platforms like this. Such a boat, such an IMOCA boat with foils that are almost flying over the water, is an extremely difficult platform to make observations on. But nevertheless, we were able to make 80 days of continuous high-quality measurement of something that difficult as carbon dioxide observations. And this is a result that we are about to publish from that race around the world. And you see on the world map there or the black line, which is a track of the Malizia boat during that race. And the colors behind there tells you the difference between two ways of analyzing the global carbon dioxide data. One with the data from this particular boat and one without the data. So the way we do that in the scientific communities is that we take all the observations we have for over years, we match that with satellite data of mostly temperature, but also chlorophyll, and we kind of apply AI, artificial intelligence, and machine learning and neural networks on that data. And so what you see on that color here is the difference between the estimates of the flux of carbon dioxide with or without that particular boat. And you see there are big numbers. There are actually very big differences if you have that single platform or not. And if you look at the other funny graphs here, it actually looks at different years. Even though this data was collected in 2021, it reflects back in time because that's how AI works. It looks at that as a reference material for looking at the other data as well. So in effect, even one single boat by a single sailor can have a big difference on how we calculate the flux of, in this case, carbon dioxide. Before that, and maybe that's part of the story, I was approached by the Volvo Ocean Race, now it's called the Ocean Race, to make some kind of science on their race around the world. And this was in 2017-2018 race. And they were particularly interested in doing observations of microplastic. So we did that, and we also collected data for carbon dioxide on these boats. So this race is slightly different. It's fully crewed, and they make different port stops. And for marine microplastic, we had a system on board, and you can see Liz Wardley here changing a filter. So they needed to do that once or twice a day, and manually, under rough conditions, change filter. And they took it back to the lab in Kiel and analyzed the content of those filters for microplastic. And you can see here how we found different amounts of microplastic in different parts of the world, and there were no place where we didn't find any microplastic. So it turned out that we were able to do carbon dioxide and microplastic, and by the success I think we had on the Volvo Ocean Race, that had led to many other sailors, including Boris Herman, to actually engage in our endeavor. Well, this citizen science project, as the title suggests, Sailing for Oxygen, is focusing on oxygen. And this is a pretty famous map that's been published a few years ago by Diaz and Rutgerson. It shows you where we have low oxygen conditions. So the light blue ones are the typical oxygen minimum zones around the world, in the world ocean. And the red dots are coastal hypoxic sites that has a tendency to be more and more of those for reasons mostly associated with eutrophication. That is also the case for the Baltic, where our project is happening. And you see on the maps here, the Danish parts of the Baltic, or around Denmark at least. And you can see the colors, not the green one, because that's land, but the yellow and the red ones. That's where we have more or less deficits in oxygen. The red one is obviously the really bad ones. And these two maps are not the same. So the left one is looking at the last 2 weeks of July in 2019. And about 2 weeks later, you have mid-August here to the right. And what you can see is that there is much more red and yellow on the right map. So that means that this really tells us there is a difference over time in how oxygen goes down. And that is, of course, due to, organic matter, algae, and others that are produced in the photic zone and sinking down to the deep and decomposing in that process using oxygen. So the Baltic is a natural area where you have low oxygen concentration just because of circulation. I will show that a little bit more. But some of this is actually man-made due to eutrophication. A lot of fertilizer are landing in the Baltic. And since that's a very, really shallow system, it affects the oxygen concentration pretty quickly. And that is one of the reasons that we choose to do oxygen in this part of the world. So here's a little bit of scientific background. So the Baltic is basically nothing else than a river mouth, or estuary, as we call it, where you have salt water coming in as a wedge in the deep and fresh water flowing out on the surface. In some winters, you have inflow of salt deep water that is also has a lot of oxygen, and some years you have less of that. And you can see this time line here from 1880 where they have quantified that inflow of oxygen-rich deep water. And I think it's clearly to see even from this graph here that there has been a decline in that kind of inflow of deep waters over time, which then of course has an effect of oxygen, not just because of eutrophication, but also change its circulation of the Baltic is then affecting oxygen. So this is just a picture from SMHI, the Swedish Agency for Hydrography, showing where you have severe and anoxic conditions in the Baltic, the black and the green, black and the gray areas. So I guess most of you know that in the area east of Gotland, the Gotland Basin, the deepest part of the Baltic, there is anoxic conditions with hydrogen sulfide. But also other parts of the deeper parts of the Baltic are affected by low oxygen. And if you look at the time here, this is now the extent in areas in square kilometers or in percentage of the Baltic over time. And you can argue if there is a trend or not. I think in the black bars there is definitely an increasing trend, possibly also in the red bars. So it tells us that the anoxic conditions of the Baltic is something that we are still struggling with, even though we have in the areas around Baltic been able to reduce the input of fertilizers and nutrients. That does help, but it's a very long process. Once you started this process, you tend to keep that going for many decades, it seems like. And one of the reasons for that is that phosphate is not reduced by anoxic waters. It stays in the water. It's actually get mobilized by anoxic water, whereas nitrate is getting reduced by oxygen deficient conditions. But the whole process then leads to formation of cyanobacteria blooms that can fix nitrogen to nitrate. So it's a kind of a self-enforcing cycle. It is difficult to come out of. And here you see the reason why the Baltic is naturally anoxic or low oxygen, because it's connected to the Atlantic with basically two narrow straits. the sound and the belts, which are shallow then, and that restricts the inflow of this oxygenated water. So you have that relatively strong stratification between freshwater and salty water, and you have not so much inflow of that salty water. So you create a lid, and below that lid you can consume oxygen, but you cannot replenish that. And our project fits well into the United Nations Decade of Ocean Science for Sustainable Development, particularly in a program called GON. That is also something that's in IOC UNESCO, looking at oxygen. So that was the motivation from Geomark for me as a scientist. First of all, we have experience of working with sailing boats and citizen science, and we wanted to take that to a next level. But then to make this, I couldn't do that myself, of course, but we have a great cooperation with Transocean. And Transocean is a sailing association, a cruising association, I would say, in Germany. It's the biggest one in Germany, one of the biggest in the world. As you see here, there is almost 5,000 members with more than 2,000 yachts, and of those, about 500 of them are in long-term distance right now. It means that more than 1,500 of the members are somewhere in Germany, and many of them in the Baltic. So Transocean looked at rejuvenating the activities of their association, and then made a survey around the members. And one of the main themes that came up that the members were very interested in was actually ocean and climate protection. So Transocean actually came to me and asked if we could do something together on citizen science and how their sailors and their members could be part of, protecting the ocean, basically. And at that time, I already had started to submit my proposal, so that was a really great match. And the guiding question here is, of course, what research team could benefit from engaging sailors as citizen science? And I had a good idea. And I must say, when I developed these ideas, the position paper, and there's also a shorter policy brief from European Marine Board, was super helpful, really super helpful to understand how this can happen. I think our citizen science project is slightly different because we actually do provide instrumentation to the citizens to do that. But here are some statements that I just basically took from this position paper that I think is worthwhile considering when we talk about citizen science. So the first one here is that citizen science is the collaboration between scientists, the general public as volunteers, to gather or analyze data relating to natural world. So it's a collaboration, very important. And I think we reflect that very well in how sailing for oxygen is built up. And the formula is simple. We give people a structured way to record observations and share them with the scientist. And we did exactly what we do. And the citizen science is then a process where citizens can become an integral part of the sharing of results and findings within the wider community, and the interaction is very much a two-way process. And we see that a lot. Of course, everybody that takes part in this and do observations are really interested to see what impact did their effort do and how can they see the data. There are some key challenges, but also a lot of opportunities to work with citizen science. And this is again from the EMB paper. So I think we have to make sure that we can recognize the scientific value of the observations. And for the Baltic, it's an easy prospect, actually, because we are working with very big differences or gradients, I would say, in oxygen, in time and space. We are working here with, DOMR is providing the scientific rigor and data quality. We are trying to represent the broad spectrum of society, but we don't really, I think, in this project, because we're working particularly with boaters. I think there are a lot of opportunities here. The opportunities are really strong, and most of the opportunities here to me is related to the possibility to get a lot of data in an area that is highly variable. Also, I think one is that I think is very important is that we can engage the citizens to understand these topics and raise awareness. So there are 10 principles here of citizen science, and we can talk about that for a long time. I think it's worthwhile considering some of them, at least, that you need to fulfill to be a successful citizen science project. And in our project, I think we are checking most of the boxes here, but let's see how that actually works out. I don't think I'm going to read all of that for you. That could be pretty boring. So I'm going to move on instead, and we can come back to talk about these things later on. But I would like to say that in Sailing for Oxygen, we are still in the learning phase. We have had 1 quarter of a season with a reduced number of instruments. And we've been building up the capability and technical know-how to scale this up, and we hope to do that next year. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we actually do. So as I said, this is a cooperation between a large sailing association and GEOMA, which is a large marine science research institute. We're actually enabling the yacht crews to become active in the marine research and collect the data. The funding, I shouldn't forget, is funded by the German Ministry of Science and Education, called BMBF. And we have a timeline of 3 years. So we have 2 more seasons to go. And we're really hoping that we can get this more operational. And if it works well, keep that going over time. So the area we work in is in the southwest Baltic, the Killer Bay. That was the area you see here that is striped, red stripes here is the area that we use this year. But we will next year expand the area to reach north to the belt bridges and east towards Rostock and kind of the eastern part of the Danish islands you see on that insert, because we have a few more instruments to work with at that time. So how are we doing this? Well, we are having instruments that we lend to the yachts, and these are small sondes that can measure salinity pressure, oxygen, and temperature. We are sending data in near real time by some apps that you can download on your smartphone, and the data are automatically uploaded on our project. We do have partners then in a number of marinas and ports, and this is something that we are building up after this first initial test phase. So in the marina, typically by the harbor master in a marina, they're going to be able to give or lend out an instrument pack to the sailors, and also to receive it back from the sailors when they're coming. So the whole basic idea is that anybody who wants to be part of this, they go to an harbor office, and if there is an instrument free, they get it. They take it for a day, maybe 2 days, maybe 4 or 5 days, as long as they're sailing around in this particular general area and they are making observations. Then can have it, and then they return it back to one of the other areas where we have connections. So this is what it looks like. We have fishing rods, high sea fishing rods, and these are connected to this CTD's oxygen sonde. This particular instrument is an XO3 from YSI, marketed by Xylem. For the next year, we're probably going to buy a slightly smaller version of that sonde called XO1, I think. That is about the same size, but a bit skinnier. This particular version can have more sensors, so that is good if you want to expand on it. But it's also a little bit heavier. But all of that fits in that box you see to the right here. So it's a waterproof cage that you can drag along and put on your boat. You put them together, your fishing rod, and you put the reel on it, and you attach the line to the instruments. And as you're sailing across the Killer Bay or any of the other areas that they think about, and the depth is at least 10 meters. I mean, we want to go to the deepest part, which is not very deep in this part of the world. It's probably like 30 meters or so. Then we ask them to stop the boat, and if you are sailing, it's going to be a lay-by maneuver probably, and then you get all the stuff up, activate your sound with your cell phone, and make a cast down to the bottom and back up again. That's really how you do it. And once you back up again, you can use your app or the apps to actually transmit the data to GeoMar. And here are some impressions. So this particular version here is actually a new version of the instrument that we're going to buy, that's slightly skinnier. And you can see behind me on the top left picture, you can see our new campus here in Kiel, GeoMar campus. And Markus Warnke in red is the main contact, is the chair of the steering committee for Transocean. And we had the launch of Transocean at a big stage here in Kiel during the flyby of the ocean race. They came into Kiel in June last year, and a lot of people were there. And already then, that was even before we had the first versions of the instruments in our hands, there was a lot of interest for the sailors to take part of this. So how can we do this? Well, I'm going to show you the website, but there is a website here. There's also a barcode, a QR code in the end of the presentation. So you can register and say that I'm interested, I will be part of the community. You can get to one of our marina supports. You get your instruments. And then you ask them to say, as you would do anyway, but if you pass a nice place that's steep and the weather is right and the coffee is just boiling, the kids are not screaming, all that things has to be right. You stop the boat and you make a profile. Just like we made on this particular boat in Ekenförde Bay late last year. And the people were very enthusiastic of trying this instrumentation and get some profiles. So this is a little bit what we did here. We started off here, but we didn't really got our first instrument until July. And one of the difficulties we had here was that the app that came with the instrumentation didn't provide all the data that we needed. So we ended up actually building our own app. So to do this, you actually need two different apps. You need an app from the instrument manufacturer and an app that we did ourselves, called Sail for Oxygen app. So if you can handle all of that and get your instrument together, you're gonna get a profile that's gonna look something like that to the right here. That is somewhere from the Kidde Bay, where the green one is salinity, a typical estuarine salinity profile, low salinity in the surface and a bit higher towards the depth, even though it's still not more than 25, which is much lower than we have in the Atlantic. The blue one is temperature. So you see this is partly from late August, so that the surface temperature is starting to cool off a little bit already, and it reduces with depth. And oxygen in black, of course, that's our main target here. A typical low oxygen concentrations towards depth, even though in this case we are still at 160 or 170 micromoles per liter. So it's still pretty high, not an issue at all for any living fishes and so on. So as I said, we are looking forward to expand. We are just in the procurement process for buying 8 more sondes. So we will have probably 10 instruments, and with the full kit of rod and reel. And most likely also we're going to buy mobile phones for the instrument. It turned out that people have different kind of smartphones, of course, and different models and so on, and installing 2 apps and making them work together didn't always work as we wanted. So we're actually going to provide cell phones in that kit, so we know that there is a kit that actually works. And all the data, once you transmit them, get visualized here, our what we call the Beluga portal at GeoMar. So in this map here, you see the profiles that we got for this season, which is not that many. We got actually many more profiles, but we had this technical issue, particularly with data transmission, that prevented us from getting all the data. So anyway, you can go in here and you can find your own data. If you had a boat and you were sailing between Germany and Denmark, for instance, and did a couple of measurements, just in a few hours after you get back to land, you're going to be able to open this website and view your profiles, or even make comments and so on. And this is also the portal where the data can be harvested from operational users like the Hydrographic Agency of Denmark and Germany, or Copernicus Marine Service, for instance. So that is how we do it. We make the data available in near real time. And once a year, we're going to do a more advanced quality control of the data. And that is the process that we are going through right now. In this month of December, we are doing final quality control of all the profiles that we have, and we are going to submit that to a data repository, which most likely is going to be IMODNet. So then there's going to be, so we have the near real-time data with just the very rudimentary quality control, and we have then a more delayed mode, high quality control data set that we submit to a repository. And I think that's it. So if you scan this code, you should be able to go into our website and register or understand a little bit more how we do things. And by that, I think I'm going to stop and have a Q&A session going on. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much to you, Toste. Yeah, as my colleagues are reminding people, you can ask your questions using the Q&A. I have several questions also listening to your presentation. Maybe while people are writing up their questions and so on, I will also ask some questions. For instance, you said that you are using the Harbor Master to provide the sailors this kind of equipment and so on. And it's also how much training did they get, or also do they also get training for problem solving with these kind of things? Because I guess you or the technology provider cannot be everywhere. So I just wonder as well, what kind of training, how much did they get, or it's just like, okay, this is the things that you need to say, and it's just in 5 minutes you can do it. So just wondering.
So we still building up our network. So this year was a little bit of trial with 2 instruments, and we had 1 port, and now we're going to engage more like 10 ports. It might be the Harbor Master, it might be a museum. I think 1 port is going to be the Maritime Museum, is going to be the connections. But one important aspect is also that the Transocean has a network around the world with support stations. So if you say to Rio de Janeiro, you member, you can probably find the member in Rio de Janeiro. It can help you find whatever you need in Rio for your boat. But they're also located around the Baltic, so we may be actually using these. So we're still, exploring that. But the question is if they got any training, and the answer is really no. We don't want them to do anything. We don't require them to change batteries or fix things. We want them really to tell us there is an issue here and make sure that we can collect it. So I do have a student that's going to work. Well, we had 1 student this year, and we're going to get another one for next year. It's a really great summer job for a student actually to go around the marinas and sail and get the instruments. And he will be trained to do a couple of things. Changing batteries and is one thing. The other thing is to calibrate the oxygen optode. So there is a regular thing that you need to do of a 0 oxygen and a saturated oxygen calibration of the sensors. And whatever comes up, maybe the rod and the reel are having issues, so you need to explain things. So there can be a number of different things that can happen with the cell phones. And you may, but basically we are going to do that ourselves. So we're going to send our student helper to take care of that. We don't expect the Harbor Masters to do more than, well, they're going to take their instruments and they're going to give it away, but they're also going to record who took the instrument and who gave it back. So we want to have some idea on who has the instruments, what is the name, what is the email address and telephone number.
Okay. Thank you very much. I don't see any questions on the Q&A, but I have a question from one of my colleagues, Britt Alexander, and she asked, what advice can you give for scientists in other regions interested in set up a similar initiative? What are the, let's say, the key factors for success? Yeah. course, another general question for.
I think in my case, well, I don't know if they have success yet. We still have to ramp it up and prove that we are successful. But the most important thing that happened was that I contact with the partner, the Sailing Association Transocean. It turned out that they had an amazing range of skills, in both technical skills, organizational skills, and communication skills, and a really strong interest to be part of the program or the project. So for me, having that kind of engaged partner outside of my institute was I would say key. But another part of that is, of course, that you have funding, right? I mean, this instrument cost a little bit of money, so I got funding from BMBF, but also funding for some technical aspects, like the quality control and to modify the Beluga portal to be able to handle the data from the system. That was also key to set that all up. But number one was, I want to say again, to the great partners of Transocean and the enthusiasm.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's actually regarding the cost of such a device. Jan says is asking that, and also, Nancy Fogarty as well is asking how much is the weight, and it's also if it's heavy enough to cope with the currents. So then it's also the cost, and it's also how much is the weight?
So we are buying many at a time, so we got a little bit of discount, I guess, but it's going to be less than 10,000 euros, a bit less than 10,000, I would say. We are ruining the market for that particular company in that range. And the weight is, I think, 4 or 5 kilos in air. It weighs much less, of course, in water. So it turns out that it's pretty heavy and difficult to reel in if it's hanging in the air, but it's easy to reel in when it's in water. So you have to kind of work your rod as a fisherman to get the thing up and down. And that is something that it turned out to be more difficult than I thought, because many of the sailors here are not really used to use that kind of tuna fishing rod and reel equipment. So we need to train them a little bit on that too. And if they can, the currents is a good question. It's not so much the currents, really. It's much more of the speed of the boat, because when you stop a sailing boat, you do the heave-to maneuver, and it doesn't really stop the boat completely, depending on the wind and so on. So we see that, one knot of making speed is probably okay. 1.5 knot maybe is the borderline, right? So that's where somewhere. And in that case, if you have a strong current, or if you cannot slow your boat down to a perfect standstill, the heavier the better, because then it sinks right down. So actually, it turns out to be good, and our experience so far tells us if you can slow down to 1 knot, you should be okay.
Yeah, thank you very much, and also thank you very much for the questions. I also have another one from my colleague Paula Kellett, and of course, as the sailors are cruising, they will go out more and only take measurements in calmer and better weather, and also during the summer and so on. So do you expect that this information, of course, will affect the conclusions and that they can be drawn? And I guess as well, that as you are looking for oxygen as well, that we know that also with heavier seas, you get more a turnover of waters and so on. So I just wonder as well, how also are you considering with this kind of like a time, let's say bias?
That's actually not an issue at all, because we are looking at the oxygen below the thermocline or the pycnocline.
Okay.
Which is not affected by the day-to-day weather, more waves or less waves. So we don't really care so much about the surface data. It's kind of great to because we expect something that is close to 100% saturation in the surface. So it's a way of us to do quality control. But we really care about the oxygen below the pycnocline, and that's not affected by that.
Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Thank you. If there are no other questions on the Q&A, I have also another one, because I saw in the kind of like print screen that you did of the measurements you get, that also you have the information on the boat. So I was wondering also in the future how citizens or the boats that provided this information will be credited or will be, acknowledged. And I guess, of course, you are still setting up the project, but I just wonder how also this information will be, how the people will be
yeah, we saw
thanked,
the
let's
name
say.
of the vessel, which is great. And you can find your own vessel information on the website, which that feedback is super important, right? So if you do this and you get an instrument and you stop the boat and do all this work, you want to be able to see, well, look at that. That's what I did, right? But also we make that voluntary, so you don't have to provide your boat name. You can be anonymous if you don't want to relieve that you were part of the system. And when it comes to reward, there's probably two things we want to do. We want to have a little bit of competition, on which boat or which team are able to collect most data in the season. So that, of course, if you want to be anonymous, you won't be part of that competition. And the second one is if eventually, which I hope, we're going to be able to write a scientific paper about the efforts, we're going to think about how we're going to make the co-authorship from that. And we're definitely going to acknowledge all the contributors, maybe acknowledgement, but there are other ways of, making that large pool of citizen science being acknowledged properly in the paper. Even though, for most people, being part of the scientific paper is not so important, maybe. It might be. So that's still something that we think about. And I think maybe by the end of 2025, when the first year of 3 years of funding is wrapping up, we're probably going to write a paper and then we're going to see how we can do that.
Thank you. And we also have a question from Janses on the Q&A that is, are you aware of similar projects elsewhere in the world? Also considering that's your partner as well, has a global network. So
it's a great question, and I am very well aware of at least one project, and that, I must say, inspired me for this project. Together with my experience with working with sailors and my interest as a sailor, and there's a project in Canada called Community of Fishers. So they actually target fishing boats, and very often they are going for bottom fish or salmon and stuff. So they had the rod and the reels already, and they are getting CTD zones, not oxygen, because oxygen is not a big issue for them. So they have a pool of citizens, fishers, if you like, fisher scientists that have instruments and go out regularly to the fishing grounds and make observations. And it kind of started in British Columbia, but it's now already in Canadian Arctic and on the east coast of Canada. So that is something that has been going on pretty well. I can't remember which context it was, but I saw a presentation by them online about that project, and I thought that was super interesting. Got in contact with them, and we exchanged about their experience and so on. And then I kind of applied that to our situation here in the Baltic, where we wanted to have oxygen, and we don't have many fisher boats that could do that, but we have a lot of sailors, so we kind of adapted that. So that was really inspiring for me to learn from them. So I think, there are many citizen science kind of organizations where you can exchange experience, and that was really useful.
Yeah, thank you very much. And it's actually also with this exchange of experiences and so on, I wanted to ask you about any anecdote or thing that you would like to highlight on, something that happens to this project or one of the boats, or something that's maybe something that you haven't thought about setting up this project that you thought that that will be really interesting to know before we started. So
well, I mean, we had one user particular that used Twitter and other social media to very proudly show himself with the instrumentation and so on, and said, my sailing boat now is turned into a research vessel, and was very proud and very positive. And so that I actually did expect that, but that was a very nice feedback. But an interesting anecdote is maybe the first experience I did with sailing boats and science during the Volvo Ocean Race 2017-18, where we had instrumentation on 2 out of, I think it was 8 boats or 7 that competed around the world. So we basically came there and they were told to put an instrument that, in a total weighed about 40 kilograms, and that is actually a competitive drawback to weigh more. But also, maybe more importantly, is that the instrument runs 24/7, right? And it needs energy. So they need to take more diesel on board to be able to run the generators more to run the instruments. And so we went down, me and my colleague went down to Lisbon, where they had a base. We talked to all the crews, and we had a seminar with all the crews, the professional sailors, and told them why this is very important. We want to save the planet, and you should do your part and so on. They were all fine with that, but the two boats that were singled out to have the instrumentation, they were not that enthusiastic, right? Because they had an extra weight, but they did it, right, in the end. And particularly the boat turned a tide of plastic, the one I was sailing in Cape Town, and Liz Wardley, you saw some pictures of that. They had an instrumentation from the start, and they turned out that they had a really good advantage in terms of outreach in media, because they were the guys doing the science and collected the plastic data and carbon dioxide. So at some point when they were in Brazil, about 2/3 into the race, there was an issue with the instruments and it didn't work. And both Liz Wardley and Di Cafari, the captain, they both independently wrote long emails to me and say, Toste, this instrument is so important for us. Get on the first flight to Brazil and fix it. You have a week before the start is, just fix it. We need this instrument. It's so important for us. So that really showed me, how it completely changed, right? They were not very enthusiastic in Lisbon, but in Brazil, they say, well, this is super important for us. We want to be part of it. It's part of our profile and so on. And I think we see that in other races now, with IMOCA's racing now, that gives them one additional dimension, because all of these sailors, they do have to have sponsors and supporters, right? And if you can show that they do something for the environment, it gives them an edge.
Yeah, indeed, that was also then wanted to highlight that, of course, it's also good for the sponsors as well, and it's also for their and how you call the industry responsibility and so on. So I guess it's also a win-win for them. Also, I just wondering, as also for this Volvo Ocean Race, because we saw a picture of somebody replacing these the filters as well. Of course, filter doesn't weigh a lot, but I guess also the sampling material and that kind of stuff also at sometimes space in there, sometimes confined, especially if you have to go around the world. So I just wonder as well also, if you consider that, or maybe the sailors already pointed out that say that this will take more space in our confined space that we have. So
yeah, that is definitely an issue on these small boats, and the instrument is it's not that big, right? But it takes on space, and so that's an issue. I think to find a space in this particular case, we used an ocean pack from the company Subsea for carbon dioxide, but there was also another unit that actually took the plastic samples. So we could kind of confine that. But the problem, of course, in the Volvo Ocean Race was that every day, or sometimes twice a day on the short legs, they had to kind of access that compartment and, turn a couple of valves and push on bottoms and take out the filter and make sure that we don't have a fleece jacket on that can cause plastic fibers to come on. All that kind of aspects were complicated. So we are working with the manufacturers of these filter units now to make them easier. You can think about a cartridge that can have all the filters you need for a week, and then you just take a whole cartridge and change it once a week, stuff like that. And it's not that light, Daniel, because it's plastic we're measuring, so we don't want plastic filters, obviously, right? So we have stainless steel filters, and if you add them up for a long leg, it was a considerable weight, it wasn't zero. So there are certainly ways of advancing how we can take those samples, I would say. And the same goes for the ocean pack, since we, in 2017-18, that instrument has, been refined by the manufacturer, is now more reliable and weigh less.
okay, yeah, really interested in them. And also, if there is no other questions on the Q&A, I would like to ask you, looking to the future and also expanding beyond the Baltic, what kind of role do you think that citizen science will have for you also improving the global ocean observing system? So I know that you are co-chair of the steering committee. So what kind of role do you think citizen science will have in the ocean?
That's a great question, Anil. I think it's going to have a really fundamental impact on the global observing system. First of all, we can consider how you define citizen science. In this case, we use, regular sailors, right? They are out there on the free time to go sailing and have fun. So that's really qualified as citizen science. But again, if you put an instrument on a commercial vessel, a container vessel, they are not scientists, but they are not just regular citizens. That's part of the work. They are professionals in what they do. But that whole range on non-scientific platforms, if you expand it to that, the oceans are so big, so large, and we have so few research vessels, and they are expensive to operate. And even, remotely operated vehicles are pretty expensive, right? So I think to be able to observe the ocean to that degree in terms of time and space that we need to, there's no way around engaging non-scientific platforms and assets on the water. And I think we are getting a long way towards doing that. And one of the reasons is that we have a great development of sensor technology. They are getting cheaper and better and so on. We still have a long way to go, but there is a difference now from 10 years to 20 years ago, because 20 years ago, there was kind of a scientist, you need a scientist to push the buttons and connect the tubes, right? But now it's much more unit, you can plug and play, right? It's not there yet, but the development is going in that direction. What we're still missing is a little bit of infrastructure to support and take care of the data, because that's not existing right now. And so far, this is a project. Sailing for Oxygen is a project. We have support for that. After the 3 years, that support is going to end. So we have to find another, grant from BMF, or maybe we can find, private sponsors or something for that. But it's still like a struggle. So in a way, if you want to have a sustained observing system using non-scientific platforms, you need to be able to provide a support system that can give feedback on how to install and what to install, but also a system that takes care of the data, right? And do the data control, data submission to the data portals, make sure the data are timely and fair. But in the long term, I think there's no way around it. And I really welcome that development to use non-scientific or citizen science, if you like, platforms for increasing the ocean observing basis.
Yep. Thank you. And it's also, you really point out something I haven't realized before, is that, of course, many of the citizen science projects are indeed projects. So in the end, the funding will stop and so on. So it's not. So the way that I see now is that there is no currently or not many examples of long-term citizen science data that also, in the long term can also be really, really useful, because of course it's something that we started, quite recently to really professionalize this. So I just wonder as well, if you see a future of possible, sustained citizen science initiatives to really provide long-term in the ocean, because for instance, I'm thinking maybe in other areas of the world, like atmosphere or tree or forest and so on, there will be more citizen science.
We can build such structures if you can show the value of it. I mean, one example that you maybe didn't think about, because it's so obvious, is the voluntary observing ships, VOS, where the ships are taking meteorological observations and sending that in real time to the communication system, feeding global weather forecast models. That has been in place for a long time, maybe 50 years or more, and it's developing constantly. And a couple of thousand ships are actually doing that. And in a way, that is citizen science, right? That is very similar to what we're trying to do, but it's very professional, of course, because it's supported by Met offices around the world. And this is exactly the way of structure we need to build up for citizen science. And I think the first bullet of the 10 principles was that there's a collaboration between science and private sector, citizens, right? And so far, we're kind of missing that part of long-term support from the scientific or agency, if you like, area to make sure that that is something that can provide the data we need. For instance, with the digital twin of the ocean. The digital twin of the ocean is really going to need lot of data to be able to operate, right? And particularly in coastal areas, having that kind of citizen science could be very important for making, you know, digital twins working well.
Indeed. And yeah, thank you very much for this. In the end up somehow some sort of interaction or conversation between of us. But yeah, I would like to thank you, Toste, and of course all the participants in this webinar. And yeah, I would just, yeah, if there are no other questions, I would like to close inviting you all to the next science webinar that will, of course, will take place on the 3rd Thursday of January, and we will look at offshore renewable energy. And it's also like also so what we're finishing now with also the importance of data as well. So it would look like yeah, at the data science for offshore renewable energy. So with that, I thank you again, Toste. Really interesting. Good luck with your project. Hopefully you will find really awesome outcomes. And yeah, with that, thank you very much. And yeah, have a nice afternoon to everybody.
Thank you. Thank you everybody for listening.